Recording in progress.
What the heck? What Zoom meeting doesn't give you the option to turn off your camera?
All right, everybody, welcome to our webinar today, hosted jointly by MedSTEMPowered and MedSchoolCoach, who's one of our partners. We are incredibly excited to have you today, and we can't wait for you all to hear from our wonderful panelists. So just to quickly introduce you guys, today is session 4.5 of the Future MDs in STEM Summer Program, and it's also a webinar that's hosted by MedSchoolCoach. So if you have any questions, we encourage you to ask them in the chat, and Selena will be sure to direct them to the two doctors that are speaking to us today. And without further ado, we're going to turn it over to them, and please feel free to ask your questions, and we'll get started.
All right, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Selena. I'm an MCAT tutor here at MedSchoolCoach, as well as a newly accepted medical student. I'm very excited to be starting this month. Today we have two really knowledgeable guest speakers, and we are going to try to answer all your questions today about things ranging from MCAT to the application experience, to the various different paths that you can take to a career in medicine. So first up, we have Dr. Chu, our Associate Director of Advising, and we also have Dr. Lee, our Director of BSMD Advising. So I'll let them both kind of introduce themselves and give us a little bit of their background and kind of what they do here at MedSchoolCoach. So we'll start with Dr. Chu.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today and for inviting me. My name is Susan Chu. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Advising at MedSchoolCoach. I mostly grew up in California and did most of my schooling in California. I went to UC San Diego for medical school and became a pediatrician, mostly practicing in Orange County in California. And now I work full-time for MedSchoolCoach. I'm really happy and excited to see all of you guys here today.
Wonderful. And Dr. Lee?
Thank you, Selena. So my name is Dr. Lee. I am currently based in the suburbs of Philadelphia, so on the opposite coast of Penn. I grew up in Illinois, and I am a graduate of Northwestern's combined program. During my time there, I served on the admissions committee there, and then after medical school at Northwestern, I did my dermatology residency at Brown. I went on and did my fellowship at Harvard, and then I went back to Brown where I was faculty and I was an assistant professor in the School of Medicine there for several years. But I'm in private practice now outside of Philadelphia, and I serve as the director of
I feel about
for
Wonderful. All right, well, we'll go ahead and we'll get started with one of our first questions. So if anyone has a specific question about anything at all, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring it. So just ask your questions, ask as many as you want, and I'll kind of pick and choose which ones we can answer today in the webinar. So to get us started, let's kind of talk about what the difference is between a BSMD program versus going a more traditional route to medical school. So Dr. Lee, could you tell us a little bit about BSMD?
Mm-hmm. So with a BSMD program, you are applying as a high schooler both to your undergrad college as well as medical school at the same time. And what that means is you're completing two sets of applications. Your undergrad Common App application for your undergrad school, as well as the medical school's individual application, which they call the BSMD application. Obviously, the benefit of this is that if you get accepted into a BSMD program, going into college, you know that you already have a guaranteed seat in medical school, assuming you meet certain requirements like GPA or MCAT testing requirements. The MCAT is kind of like the SAT, but for a medical school. The downside of some of these BSMD programs is just that they're super, super competitive to get into. So the acceptance rates for BSMD programs usually ranges anywhere from less than 1% to maybe 5 or 6% if you happen to be lucky enough to live in a state that has its own BSMD program that only takes in-state students for the 5 to 6%. On average, the acceptance rates are closer towards 1.5 to 2%. And in comparison, the acceptance rate at Stanford last year was about 4.4%, and the early action acceptance rate to MIT was about 4.3%. So these numbers are supposed to be scary, but the reason that you guys are all motivated and are all hard workers and are interested in kind of seeking out the experiences you need to be a strong applicant.
Wonderful. And Dr. Chu, could you tell us a little bit about the more traditional route as well?
Sure. So the more traditional route is generally someone who graduates from high school and then goes on to do a 4-year university program and finish college in 4 years, or 5 in some cases. And then after that goes to medical school. So in this case, people are applying to medical school near the end of their college time or after they're finished with college. And so it's different from the BSMD program in that you don't apply until later. It's a lot of times good for people who aren't quite sure if they want to be a physician or not. And so you're kind of going to college and exploring different options and things like that. Or even if you do know that you want to be a physician, it just gives that person some time to kind of get more experience in the field of medicine and everything and prepare their application a little bit differently than the BSMD program. So it's more of a going to college and finishing college and then going to medical school after that.
Absolutely. And I also went the traditional route. So if anyone has any questions about my experience, I definitely agree with everything that Dr. Chu just said. I really actually appreciated the chance to kind of go at my own pace and have opportunities to try more different things instead of being committed to one particular pathway. So if you're kind of undecided, you're not quite sure yet, I think that traditional is a great way to go as well. So I see a lot of questions in the chat coming up about kind of majors, what is the best pre-med major and that kind of stuff. So this comes up a lot. And, I personally was the very traditional biology major. That's what a lot of pre-meds end up doing. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of what majors are quote unquote the best. So Dr. Lee, what are your thoughts on this?
So I'm actually going to give this one to Dr. Chu, because if you're in the BSMD program, one of the benefits is that you can major in anything. You already have a guaranteed seat. But I think Dr. Chu can kind of give you her thoughts on what the best major is for someone that's applying to med school from college.
Sure. So the best major is that there really isn't a best major. The most common major is probably biology. I was also a biology major. And a lot of us choose that route because we just enjoy biology. And that's why I chose that route to go through. And that's fine to do that. As long as you complete the prerequisite courses that the schools require, then you can do any major that you would like to do. So there are kind of basic courses that every med school is going to want, things like a year of general chemistry, a year of organic chemistry, usually a year of physics, things like that, and sometimes some biochemistry or some math, calculus, statistics, those kinds of things. And so as long as you take those courses and do well in them, you can major in anything that you want. You don't have to be a pre-med major or a biology major. So it's really based on what you enjoy, what you're passionate about, and also what you want to do. And I also was thinking, if I did not end up going to medical school, what major would I want to be that I would want to maybe work in that field in the future? And for me, that was biology. For other people, it's art history or something different like that. So if you do major in something non-science, then you do have to be aware that things like the MCAT are going to heavily involve a lot of science. So you want to make sure that you're taking enough courses that you are prepared for those things and for the schooling that's coming in med school. But if you want to major in something in the humanities, then that's totally fine. And also if you want to major in physics or chemistry or any other science course or major, then that's fine as well.
Yes, I completely agree. And, to kind of add on to that, I think that a lot of people where I went to school kind of chose whatever major they wanted. They went with whatever they were happy with and passionate about, but they often had minors that corresponded to the pre-med prerequisites, and that would kind of help them fulfill those requirements as well. I sort of did the opposite, where I did biology and I also had minors like business and cognitive science that kind of fulfilled my other interests as well. So keep in mind, you can get minors as well. That can be very, very helpful. On that kind of note, we have an interesting question about kind of how your major can affect your MCAT studying. And I can talk a little bit about the MCAT study process and answer those questions a little bit. But first, I'd like to kind of ask Dr. Lee about not having an MCAT and kind of your thoughts on that. There were a couple questions about how that affects students, whether that's a good thing, bad thing. What are your thoughts on that for BSMD?
Yeah, so the majority of BSMD scores do still, or programs do still require the MCAT with a minimum score, and the minimum score will range. For the schools that don't require an MCAT, you still have to take all of the pre-med prerequisites and obtain a certain GPA. So it's not like once you get into a BSMD program, you can just totally peace out and watch binge Netflix. I think that the programs that don't have an MCAT still have fairly stringent pre-med requirements as well as GPA requirements. And so students who go into those programs are still pretty prepared for medical school.
Yes, absolutely. And to kind of answer some of the more specific MCAT questions that you guys have been asking, like I said, I'm a tutor at MedSchoolCoach. So this is what I do. I sit down with students and kind of plan out their whole MCAT journey, as well as helping them with the individual subjects and kind of going over the materials. So the first question I saw here was about kind of when should you get started? How long do you need to study? I usually recommend that if you are not doing anything else, and MCAT studying is just your whole life, 3 months should be about enough time. If you have work or volunteer or school or other things that are going on, I would recommend more like 4 to 6 months of studying. The most important thing though is that you have 1 month of like dedicated time right before your exam to do all of the full lengths and all of the prep materials that are going to be required of you. So it definitely varies from person to person, but those are kind of the averages that lead to a lot of success with my students. As well as kind of materials that we can use, there are a lot of free resources. We actually have a company called Prospective Doctor that works with MedSchoolCoach. There are so many resources that are available on that site related to MCAT, as well as just other pre-med resources, blog posts, articles, videos, all kinds of things there. So definitely check that out. I think we can link that in the comment section here. But there's a lot of free resources like that, as well as possibly getting a tutor to help you. And we do that at MedSchoolCoach as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it, tons of different MCAT prep courses out there. I personally don't think that one is absolutely necessary, but it can be very, very helpful, especially if you didn't have the foundation in the sciences that you need. So those are my MCAT thoughts. Feel free to ask more questions. We can kind of circle back to this later. But the next kind of category of questions I'm seeing is more about extracurriculars. So what are some extracurriculars that you would consider to be kind of plain or average, maybe not as exciting? That came up in one of the questions. And what are some that you would consider to be really unique and special that would really help students on their application? So I'll ask this to Dr. Chu.
So I think of extracurriculars as being in sort of different categories. So the first category would be clinical volunteer work. So that would be anything where you're hands-on with patients. So that would be things like volunteering in a hospital, volunteering in a free clinic, helping at a doctor's office and taking vital signs of patients, like checking their blood pressure, their heart rate, their breathing rate, all of those kinds of things. So that would be a clinical volunteer activity. Then there's non-clinical volunteer extracurriculars, and those are things where it's not hands-on with patients. So if you're working in the clinic, but you're just doing the paperwork at the front desk, that would be more of a non-clinical activity. If you're working with the homeless, if you're working at a food pantry, any of those kinds of things are non-clinical volunteer activities. Then there's also shadowing a physician. And so that would be you going to a doctor's office or to the hospital and just watching that physician basically for long periods of time. So that's when you don't have a job there except to watch what the physician is doing. And the point of that is for you to learn what the daily in and out of a physician's job is like. And then there's research, which can be just basic science research, which is in a laboratory where you're working with the test tubes and things like that. It can be clinical research where you're working with patients. And usually doing that for a good year or 2 years at least is a good idea. And then there's leadership and teaching sorts of opportunities. So whether that's tutoring, whether it's being a leader in some sort of a volunteer activity that you're doing, any of those kinds of things would show leadership. So anything that I mentioned is probably considered a pretty normal extracurricular activity. I wouldn't say that any of them are necessarily boring or anything that I would throw out as not being interesting or anything like that. It's kind of what you make out of the experience. But the way that you want to stand out is in two ways, I think. One is they want you to have some kind of commitment to that activity. So it's not good if you kind of switch activities every couple of months and do 100 different things, but you're never there for longer than a couple of months at a time. So if you can, at least in each of these categories, commit to something for over a year at least, or even longer if you can, then that shows that you can be committed to something, that you can really, ride through the highs and lows of whatever that experience is. And so that's good. It's also good to have a range of activities. So we don't want you to just do one clinical activity for 4 years of college and never get any other experience. We want you to try other things as well. And outside of that, the best way to stick out is to do things that you are passionate about and that you can really kind of grow with. So if there's any kind of a volunteer activity, for example, let's say you are volunteering at the hospital, and if you become the type of volunteer who is so reliable and so trustworthy that they allow you to be the head of the volunteer so that you help with scheduling other volunteers and things like that, those are kind of ways to stick out, where if you can get some sort of a leadership position in any of the activities that you're doing and show kind of progress in what you've been doing, then that's a really good way to stand out. So it's not that you have to do the things that I've listed in terms of like the specific things that I've listed, but you can do whatever it is that you want. I would try to check off all of those categories, but within those categories, do whatever that you want, but try to be really committed to those things and show progress as much as you can in each of in several of the different volunteer activities that you do.
Yes, that's wonderful, Dr. Chu. I completely agree. And to kind of give an example of how you can do that, on my application, my passion was martial arts, which is super weird and has nothing to do with medicine at all. But I was able to turn it into a leadership and volunteer experience because I rose to the rank of an instructor and was able to teach a women's self-defense seminar for women who couldn't afford to take our classes. So there's a lot of different ways you can turn something that you're already doing and you already love into a really, really great standout activity. So on kind of that note, it's ideal to have this kind of an activity, but COVID has made it really difficult to do some of the things that we have done in the past. So I'll ask this question to Dr. Lee. What are some virtual experiences that are just as good, right, as maybe an alternative, right, to something that maybe students were doing before, but now they no longer have access to, such as shadowing?
So I think that there are certainly ways that you can get creative about how you can continue to be involved in your community. If you're looking purely just for virtual opportunities.
This actually disappears over the first few weeks of life, and eventually the baby turns its head voluntarily.
You can continue to.
We also have the
a nursing home or at a hospital, but instead of actually going into the hospital or nursing home, you can offer to do phone calls with the residents and develop a relationship that way with them. You can offer to, lead technology sessions to teach them how to open their iPad or turn it on or download Zoom so they can keep in touch with their grandchildren. There are many, many ways to be creative. If you were volunteering at a food bank before, you can organize neighborhood community food drives. Some of my neighbors are doing that. And it doesn't have to be a food drive, it could be a toy drive. All of these things show initiative so that when you're filling out that application on the Common App that they added last year for undergrad schools, which was, how did COVID affect your education and what did you do during COVID? Instead of saying, well, because of COVID, I couldn't take my SATs more than once, and that's why I got a 1200. Because of COVID, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, I couldn't do all of this stuff. If instead you're able to say, because of COVID, I instead had all this time and all this opportunity to organize neighborhood food drives, and we donated enough food supplies to make meals for 200 families. Think how much more powerful that is. And that's not that much more effort than what you were doing before if you were volunteering in person. So you just have to get creative with the resources that you have and show initiative.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that statement. And to kind of go back to the topic of virtual shadowing as well, MedSchoolCoach has an amazing virtual shadowing program. We'll link it in the chat here, but it's free and there's almost all the medical specialties. We have tons of them. So whatever you're interested in, you can go and you can shadow from the comfort of your own home. So check that out if you need some more shadowing hours. We give a certificate to show that you attended the session, how long you spent and all that stuff that you can submit to your schools as well. So on that note as well of kind of COVID, causing problems for people, I would love to hear your thoughts on kind of the competitiveness of medical school and how COVID has affected that. So Dr. Chu, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, last year, over the entire nation, applications went up by about 18% across the nation, which means that there were just a lot more people in the pool than normal. So in an already competitive process, it was even more competitive because there were more people that you're competing against. My guess is that this year is going to be similar because all the people that did not get in last year are going to be reapplying this year. And my guess is that over the next several years, it'll kind of go back down to normal numbers as it was before the pandemic. And so in this case, I think right now it is a challenging time, but it's just a time where everybody needs to kind of, if you really want to go to med school, really think about how your application can stand out, how you can show, like Dr. Lee was saying, that you use this time to do something productive and good for your community, how you have been able to stand out in your different volunteer opportunities that you've been doing and things like that. So it has made things higher in numbers, but obviously it's still going to be that the students who are most prepared and who are have really invested the time and energy into applying to medical school are really going to stand out and do well.
Wonderful. I completely agree. So I see quite a few questions before kind of we got started on this topic about BSMD. So I'll ask Dr. Lee some questions now about that. So some people are asking about international students and how they can be accepted into BSMD programs. So could you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so every year we probably have at least one or two international students that we work with that we get that we've been able to successfully help them gain acceptance to a BSMD programs. You just have to know which schools accept international students, and you can find that out either on the website or by emailing the admissions office. And you just have to make sure that you frame your application in terms of why your international residency or your experiences more so will be an asset to your career in medicine. It certainly can be done. You just need to do a little bit more background work in terms of what programs you can apply to and what they expect of the international students in terms of transcripts and letters of rec and standardized testing scores.
Awesome. That's great information. And a couple people also asked if there's any courses that they can take as a high schooler or any kind of extracurricular activities they can do that would make them more competitive for a BSMD program.
I think this really kind of goes back to the question about extracurriculars. I would say just pick your extracurriculars and be passionate about them. I think Susan's example of at volunteering, that you rise to become the leader of the volunteers or to train other volunteers, is the best example. So if you really put your time and effort into the activities you do, it really will show on your resume, and it'll end up in a leadership position or in other types of recognition that will help you stand out in your application.
Absolutely. And to kind of piggyback off of that as well, I'll ask this question to Dr. Chu, but a lot of people are asking about how they should be spending their time as a high schooler. So people are asking, what are some things they should do? Should it be research? Should it be shadowing? Should it be volunteer? How would you recommend that they spend their time that they have in high school?
I think that the first thing is to try to explore the field of medicine and make sure it's something that you really want to go into. And so if you think about it, if you're a traditional applicant, when you apply to medical school at the end of your college years, what you're going to put on your application is almost entirely going to be from your college years. It's not going to necessarily be from your high school years, unless you do something really huge, like you really made a dent in the solving cancer in high school, then you're going to put that on your application as well. But otherwise, most of your application activities are going to be coming from college. So in that case, I think that it's most important that you do things that you enjoy, but also that you are exploring what medicine is like. So if you have an opportunity to do some research and you want to know, is that something that I want to do? Then I think it's fine to go and try some research. I think volunteering or shadowing is great because it really gives you an opportunity to see what being a physician is like. And for some people, they're going to do that and say, you know what, this isn't what I expected it to be. And that's fine. It gives you a lot of time then to find another career that works for you, or to find that you really love it, and then also build connections with whatever doctors and nurses that you're working with so that you can continue to build on the different volunteer activities that you're doing. So, and I think in high school, the important thing is to kind of try to explore the different options that are available to you, find what you love, and just kind of, go towards whatever it is that you're passionate about and that you really enjoy.
Absolutely. And I saw a really great question here about kind of people being a little bit nervous to reach out and, get these opportunities. Because I know as a high schooler, this was really intimidating for me. It is for everybody. And so I'm going to ask this question for Dr. Lee, actually. But what are some ways that you can reach out to nursing homes, hospitals, all these different organizations to get opportunities like shadowing and volunteering?
So most of your community hospitals or your larger hospitals will have established volunteer departments, and I would bet that the majority of them will have specific summer programs for high school students. So don't be scared about reaching out because these programs are designed for you. So I would just look on their website, specifically at the volunteering department, to see if they have an established high school program. And if they don't, they definitely will still have a volunteer department, and they'll have an email that you can reach out to. So these places are often looking for volunteers, and they welcome everyone. And it doesn't hurt to just use it as an information gathering stage. You might be 14 and they might say, well, no, we don't take volunteers until they're 16, but we'll keep you in mind. Reach back out to us when you're 16. And so you already have information on how to apply the second you turn 16.
Wonderful. Yeah, I definitely experience this as well. I currently volunteer at a lab and there are high school students in my lab. So these opportunities definitely do exist, but it can take a lot of, tenacity on your part to keep emailing and keep calling. It can take quite a while to land something in my personal experience. Kind of related to that, we also have a question about how you can get involved with these experiences if you really don't have any experience or connections at all. Is there any way you would recommend kind of getting started with that process? So I'll ask Dr. Chu.
I think being proactive and creative are the two words that really are the most important. So even if you don't have any experience at all, it's basically cold calling people then. So looking up things on the internet, like Dr. Lee was saying, most places know that you want some experience. And so most places are going to provide some way for people to volunteer. And if they don't, then you can always just call and ask, is there some way at your hospice that I can come in and start volunteering and things like that? And people will say no, and that's okay. You have to just be okay with that. Like Selena was saying, sometimes it takes several calls or several opportunities to really find the one that fits you the best. And so you do have to be a little bit determined with that, and that's fine. But just look on websites, call people, email people. You just have to be proactive and find things. I saw somebody asking about shadowing. Same thing, if you don't know any physicians, what you can do is try volunteering in a place that has physicians first. And a lot of times then you're gonna meet some doctors there and things like that. Otherwise, it's basically trying to email or connect with different doctors' offices and things like that, and just asking if they would be willing to take on a shadowing high school student. And some of them are gonna be really open to it. Some of them are gonna have a lot of rules where they can't have students with them and things like that. And so you just have to be persistent and patient, and be willing to kind of put yourself out there and take some risks in asking. But in general, people really know that your desire is to become a physician, and they want to be able to help you. And so you just have to kind of be proactive in that process.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll add to that. I'm a first generation student. No one in my family is a doctor. So I actually started by shadowing my primary care physician. So sometimes your own doctor will kind of open that door for you. And then she was able to get me other opportunities from the doctors that she knew. So that's a good way to also get your foot in the door for all my first gens out there. We also have a really interesting question that's kind of different. We're going to go in a different direction here, but this one's also for Dr. Chu. So what is your opinion on taking easier classes during undergrad to ensure a competitive GPA versus taking harder classes that may risk bringing it down?
Here's my thing. I'm trying to say this nicely. In my opinion, medical school was much harder than undergrad. So if you're trying to coast through undergrad to get the best GPA, it will probably not make you very well prepared for medical school. So in my opinion, you have to be kind of strategic about it. So what I would not do is maybe put all of your hard classes in your first semester of college, because that's just going to be too difficult of a challenge. What would be smart to do is to kind of look at what are the different things, the prerequisites that schools require. How can I split them up so that I have some harder classes and some that maybe aren't so hard, so that I can still graduate on time, but also meet all of the requirements and only have maybe 2 classes that are on the harder side, so that I can really devote more time to them. Your GPA is very, very important. And it is really in your best interest, of course, to do as well as possible in all of your classes. But if you're trying to, I would try to be careful with any thought of trying to go easier on yourself in undergrad, because that is not doing you any favors for when you get to medical school. I would try to give yourself some challenge, because you're going to need it, and because it's going to prepare you better for when you become a med student.
Yes, I completely agree with that statement 100%. And I will say there are some prerequisite courses that you just have to take, and they are just hard, right? I'm thinking about physics, OChem, they're just difficult and there's no getting out of them. What I would recommend is understanding that they're difficult going in and making sure that you're using your university's resources. They're going to have office hours, they're going to have tutoring, most likely, small group discussions. So really try to take advantage of those things if you do have to take those more difficult courses. All right, and kind of moving back to some high school related questions here, I'll ask Dr. Lee this question. Are there any AP or IB courses that you would recommend high school students to take to prepare them for a career in medicine?
Mm-hmm. So now that the SAT subject tests are a thing of the past, so they've been completely discontinued, it's important that you show that you can handle upper level math and science coursework. And so I would definitely recommend taking calc, as well as at least 2 of the sciences, whether it's biophysics or chem. On the AP side, there's several AP physics. So when I say 2 of the sciences, don't just take AP Physics 1 and Physics 2. Make sure that you have a diversity of the sciences, but definitely at least take a calc or higher level math course, as well as 2 upper level science courses.
Yes, I could not agree more. I did not take AP calculus when I was in high school, and I really, really regretted it, because I had to take the entire calculus sequence at my very challenging university instead of just doing the AP version. So definitely take that advice. I wish that I had. Another question that we have is kind of about hours and extracurriculars, and how many hours students really need to be competitive. So I'll ask this to Dr. Chu. Do you have any recommendation for how many extracurricular hours, how many volunteering, shadowing, research, how to kind of spend your time, and what number of hours you need to be competitive?
Sure. So what I usually tell people, I used to say this is an average. I think now it's what you should be aiming for at a minimum. If I talked about how I talked before about the different categories of extracurriculars, I tell people to aim for a minimum of 200 hours of clinical volunteering, a minimum of 200 hours of non-clinical volunteering, a minimum of about 100 hours of shadowing in person. And so that's what you're trying to aim for over the next several years if you're a traditional medical student, to get over the course of your undergraduate time. So you can obviously spread that out. The more hours you have, the better, obviously. But I would try to aim for that at a minimum. For research, I would do at least a year. If you can do more than that, that's nice, if you enjoy it. If you can publish something or do a presentation or a poster or an abstract or something with your research, that's going to look much better than if you don't. And in terms of leadership and everything, it's just sort of the more the merrier, as much as you can. But in general, I think of 200 clinical, 200 non-clinical, 100 shadowing, at least a year of research is kind of a minimum that I would recommend.
Yes, absolutely. I would completely agree with that. And Dr. Lee, do you have any thoughts about a BSMD program? Does that change the numbers that you would recommend?
Mm-hmm. So with BSMD programs as a high school student, you obviously don't have as many of the same opportunities that you would after you turn 18. So there are no like target hours that you should be hitting, just because, especially for some of the clinical activities, you may not even be able to participate in those until after you're 16 or older. But definitely you should just show that you have exposure to all of those categories that Susan mentioned: clinical volunteering, shadowing, non-clinical volunteering, and at least dabbling in some research.
Great. And we have another question about kind of the more non-traditional route. So I'll ask this to Dr. Chu. Some people are asking about how a passion project could improve their chances, or possibly, exploring a different career path in healthcare, such as nursing. What are your thoughts on those more non-traditional paths?
I think that doing some sort of non-traditional path is great if that's what you're really looking to do. But if you're going to apply to medical school, then you just have to really show why it is the correct path for you now to leave that other path that you were on and redirect yourself to medicine. So what people want to do, I mean, I went to school with people that were executives in, I think, Lay's potato chips or something like that was one of my classmates. And he decided he wanted to go to medical school. Well, if he's going to do that, then he needs to show why should he abandon this career that he's been working on for 20 years, and why has it now become a passion and a real thing that he's going to go back to the bottom and start at med school at number one, like with no salary and everything, even though he has a family and everybody to support. So if you're that kind of a non-traditional applicant, it's fine. You just have to really show that you are committed to and that you know that this is the right path for you.
Absolutely. And I will say, I had a little bit of an odd gap year myself. I was a social media manager at MedSchoolCoach in my gap year, as well as being an MCAT tutor. Pretty odd, different career path than most people, but it ended up being a really advantageous for me, I think, because it was weird and interesting. And a lot of people asked me about it in my medical school interviews. It's kind of a fun and interesting thing to talk about. So I see it as a positive as well. I think if you can explain your connection to medicine, it's going to be really great for you. Alrighty, on to our next question here. We have some research questions coming up, so I'll ask some of those now. A couple of people are asking about how they can get involved with research as a high school student and as a college student. So Dr. Chu, do you have any thoughts on how to get started with that process?
So generally, when you're in college, you're going to find research in a couple of ways. One is if you were to take a class with somebody who's doing research, like a professor who's doing research in some area that you find really interesting. And then you could just go to that professor who is teaching you anyway and ask if there's any place where you can get involved with their research. So that would probably be the easiest way to go. A lot of times you're not necessarily going to be interested in whatever research your professor is doing in your first year of medical school and things like that. So a lot of times it's good to just look on your school's website, see what kind of research professors are doing, because they're going to have something posted on the web about what kind of research they're working on. And if you know someone, then it's nice to kind of get in that way. Like I had a friend who was doing research and she kind of put in a good word for me. And so then I went and talked to that professor and got into that lab. But if you don't have a connection, then it's kind of nice if you can look at that person's work that they're doing on the internet or read some of the journals of experiments that they've been working on, and then just send them an email, say that you're interested, because professors love people that are interested in their work. And a lot of them really would love to have people come on board to help them for free to do more research. And so if you tell them, if you've kind of done your background work into looking at what they do and that you're really genuinely interested, a lot of them would be happy to talk to you and see if they can find a place. So you kind of have to find a way that way.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And I will also say, when I was just getting started with this, I had no idea how important research was. And it is very important, especially if you're considering a more competitive medical specialty. So something like plastic surgery or dermatology, you're going to be doing research. So if it's not something that you're interested in, I would suggest giving it a chance, because I didn't think I would like it and I ended up absolutely loving it. So give it a chance. If you're not sure about research, definitely check it out and kind of see the different types that are available. And on that note, some people are asking if the type of research does matter. There's a lot of different ways that you can do research, different types of research. Are there any that are considered better or worse in the eyes of medical schools? I'll ask this to Dr. Lee.
So all research is good research. The only research that I advise against, actively against, especially for a high school student, is that there's a lot of what I call predatory research opportunities out there. And what that means is that you pay them like $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, and they pair you with a mentor and you do research on something and write a white paper. You should never be paying anything in that amount or close to that amount for a research opportunity if it's a real research opportunity. And I call those predatory programs because really those programs are just seen as being there to kind of take advantage of you and to make money off of you. The value of that research, I'm not sure is really there. And so any research is good, whether you're doing it on space or plants or biology. Just don't do one of those predatory programs that charge you tons of money.
Absolutely. And I'll ask the follow-up question to Dr. Chu about this. Is there any type of the way of doing research that you would recommend? Some people are talking about a master's in science, becoming a lab assistant. There's so many different ways that you can get involved. Are there any that you would consider to be better or worse than others?
I think if we talk about a master's, it depends on what your goals are. A master's involves more schooling. And so usually when people are at your age thinking about going to medical school, they don't want to add years onto their schooling. So if you do take a master's approach, then it's either because you absolutely love that subject or because you're trying to change or increase your GPA. From undergrad. And so if that's the case, then I think that's totally fine to do. Or sometimes people will do the master's with research because they did not get a chance to do research in undergrad. And so that master's program allows them to fulfill that. So that's fine as well. Otherwise, I don't really think that there's any perfect way to do research or better than others, as long as you're actively involved in doing the research, because there's a difference between somebody being some sort of assistant where you have no idea what's going on. You're just kind of washing beakers and filling test tubes with I don't know what kind of thing. If that's the case, then that doesn't look very good, right? But if you, the best kind of research would be something where you can be actively involved in the process of coming up with what is the problem that we're going to study and how am I going to get to an answer with this problem. If you can be involved in that process, that's the best kind of research that you can do. Or if you can have your own project where you and the professor directly are talking and discussing how you can get to the right answer by yourself, and you're in charge of how you dedicate your time and what kind of experiments you do. Those kinds of things are going to be the best thing to show your own initiative, your own creativity, your own ability to solve problems and things like that. And any kind of research that you can contribute to in your lab where you can get your name on a published paper or your name on a presentation or something like that is also going to look really good for your medical school applications.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we have a question for Dr. Lee now as well. People are curious about the difference between an early assurance program versus a BSMD program. Could you tell us a little bit about the differences there?
Mm-hmm. So with a BSMD program, again, you're applying from high school. And what that means is that when you are a high school student and you've been accepted to a BSMD program, you have been accepted both to the undergrad and to the medical school. With an early assurance program, you usually apply for those programs during your at the end of your sophomore year, sometimes the beginning of your junior year of college. In contrast, and Selena and Susan, Dr. Chu can tell you more about the traditional route. With the traditional route, you are applying more towards the senior year of your college. So an early assurance program gives you an opportunity to apply to med school earlier, but it's still after your sophomore year of college, whereas a BSMD program, you're applying your senior year of high school.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say I was the more traditional route, so I didn't get to experience any of this, but it does certainly give you a lot more time to do the activities that you want to put on your application and more time to think about if that is the path that you really want to go down. So I think that's kind of the biggest difference in my experience is I had a lot more years to kind of think about it and get more experiences. So we have a question now for Dr. Chu. How does the undergrad university that you choose affect your chances of getting into medical school? Some people are asking about, the kind of prestigious universities versus a lesser known university, big versus small. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a little bit complicated because it does matter what undergrad you go to, but it's not everything. And so I have a lot of clients who will go to places like University of Pennsylvania. It's an amazing school, but they get really bad GPAs there and really struggle. And in that case, maybe it would have been better to go to a smaller university that gave them a little bit more of the support that they needed, or whatever it is that might have been different in that case, or maybe something that's not quite as competitive might have given them a better GPA. So it's kind of, there's so many different factors to that it's a difficult question to answer just a yes or no. But basically, I would try to go to as prestigious of a university as you can, knowing that that's not everything. They're going to look at the number of your GPA and factor in what kind of school you went to as well. So if you went to, let's say, a state school, it's maybe not going to be as big of a name as a really big university in your state or something like that. Then yeah, they might weigh a little bit that your GPA at a 4.0 might not be as competitive as somebody who got a 3.7 at the big university. So they do kind of take that into consideration, but it's just not everything. So the 4.0 at the state school is still going to look, it's going to be strong and look good. So I think that you should go to the strongest school that you can go to and get the best GPA that you can there.
Awesome. And on a similar note, Dr. Chu, some people have been asking about community college credits and AP credits, whether they look good and whether they count for medical school prerequisites. Do you have any thoughts on this?
AP credits usually do not count, although things like for math and things like that, sometimes it'll kind of carry over because your school will say you don't have to do the whole math year and things like that. But usually AP credits will not count. Usually your prerequisite classes, it's better not to take at a community college if possible, but obviously a lot of people do, and that's fine. But more of a state university kind of level for the prerequisite classes is going to be better for you just in the long term as well, because those classes are going to be more challenging at the university level. And like I said, med school is like much more challenging than the university level is. So you have to kind of prepare yourself for that as well. So a lot of people will try to do the community college thing and transfer to a university. I think that's a great way to go. Just try to get the strongest background in your prerequisites as possible.
I think that where the AP credits are definitely helpful is that you can count your AP credits towards the school's own requirements. And that means that you can free up some of those credits or some of those hours so that you can take courses towards your pre-med or your majors.
Yes, I was going to say as well, that's why I regret the calculus decision, because a lot of my peers did that AP course in high school and I was sitting there taking calculus while they were working on more important classes. So it can definitely be beneficial. Any AP class is going to help you kind of get some of those prereqs out of the way for the college so you can focus on the medical school prereqs, which are far more important. And then we also have an interesting question. I'll ask this to Dr. Lee. Is there any sort of connection between a medical school and a residency program? So people are interested in, applying to a medical school because they want to eventually go to that medical school's residency program. What are your thoughts on this?
So that's thinking very, very far in advance. So it really depends on the residency programs. Some residency programs often take their own medical students because they know the students and they have a relationship with them, so they know they'll be good residents. Some programs, at least in dermatology, don't take any of their own students because they believe that it's important for their students to get a really good diversity of experiences in order to be a good doctor. So it not only varies based on the specialty, but it also varies based on the school itself. So I would not make your decision on what medical school to go to based on being interested in that residency program.
Absolutely. And to kind of circle back to the topic of research, Dr. Lee, some people are asking about whether you have to have research, essentially if it's like an unspoken rule or requirement for a BSMD program.
Mhm. So it's definitely beneficial to have research, and it will make you a stronger candidate. You don't absolutely have to have research to get into the BSMD program. There are definitely BSMD programs that are much more clinically focused, and what they're looking for is the clinical applicant. So you should have, a lot of good clinical and non-clinical community service hours, but not necessarily research. There are some BSMD programs that are called the research scientist program, in which there are research requirements during the summers. And so for those types of programs, they are looking for people who have had research experience in high school.
Great. And then I'll ask kind of a similar question to Dr. Chu. Would you say that research is sort of required as the more traditional student, or would you say it's just recommended?
I usually tell people, of those categories that I talked about of clinical, non-clinical, volunteering, shadowing, leadership, and research, you can have some of those be absent, but it will be a visible hole in your application. It will be something that they'll notice is missing. Med schools love research. I did not enjoy research like Selena did. I did not think I would enjoy it. I did it for a year and I did not enjoy it. And that's fine. It's just who I am. That's what it is. But if you don't have something out of those categories, then it shows up as something that's missing from your application. So if that's what you choose, and I have some, clients who say like, well, I don't want to do research, I'm not doing it, then that's a choice that you are making. But you have to understand that makes you, if they're looking at two different applicants and you both have everything being equal, that person who has research is going to have a step up ahead of you. And in this very competitive process, I would say you should try to get every advantage that you can. So I would definitely try to get involved in research, as I can't say a requirement, but kind of, if that makes sense.
Yes, I could not agree more. And, to kind of go off of my point, in my mind, I had this view that research was just sitting by yourself pipetting, and it can be that sometimes, but there's so many different types of research that are not maybe what you're thinking that they are. So if you're kind of opposed to that, whatever image you have of research, there's probably some opportunities that are much more social or much more catered to your interests. So I will just say from my experience, I went into it with a pretty negative attitude and came out very surprised that I actually really enjoyed it. So do some research, see what kinds are more interesting to you, what you think is going to fit your personality better. There's probably something out there for you. All right, on to the next question about gap years. So a couple people have been asking about gap years. I personally took a gap year, so I can attest to the fact that it did not hurt my chances because I got into many medical schools. And it actually, I think, helped me because it gave me some time to do more interesting activities, like I was talking about, of becoming an MCAT tutor and a social media manager, which I never would have been able to do without that extra time. So I personally really like my gap year. But Dr. Chu, what are your thoughts on taking a gap year?
I think gap years are great. And I'm maybe a little biased as well because I took a gap year too back, 100 years ago when I applied to med school. But what I think is great about a gap year is that it gives you time to kind of just step away from the hardcore academics that you've been doing. You've been running so hard in this one direction for so long. It's nice to take a year to just do something different, explore different interests, do something that you wouldn't normally do, and kind of just expand your horizons a little bit, meet new people, have a different experience. I think that's really great. And it also just matures you a little bit. I think a lot of times it's very obvious to medical schools who's applying straight, like during college and going straight, and who's taken some time to just learn a little bit about themselves and about how to work with other people, be a great team player, get a job so that you know what it's like to work for somebody. All of those things just make you kind of a more mature applicant, and that can be really attractive to medical schools as well. So if you decide not to do that, then that's okay too. But I don't think that there should be any reason to feel like a gap year is going to hurt you unless you take a gap year and sit around and do nothing, or like hurt people, or like do something like that's not beneficial to your application, which would be very hard to do. But if you do something that's beneficial for your community, for yourself, that helps you grow, I think there's nothing but benefits for a gap year.
Absolutely. And Dr. Lee, what are your thoughts on this?
So gap years are very rare in high school. And so I certainly have helped students that have taken gap years before. But again, it's very unusual to take a gap year just at the high school level.
Absolutely. And so for BSMD, most people don't end up having gap years. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would say most people don't have a gap year out of high school for BSMD. If they don't get into a BSMD, they typically go to a really strong undergrad that has good pre-med, a good pre-med curriculum, and they'll apply to medical school the traditional way. I would advise against taking a gap year just for the goal of getting into BSMD. If that is your goal, you will very likely be disappointed. And I would instead say that you should apply to just traditional undergrad and go that route.
Absolutely. All right. And our next question is about kind of how we should be spending our summer as both high school students and college students. So people are wondering, are there any quote unquote crucial summer activities that you would highly recommend, or just any that you would recommend in general? So Dr. Chu, what are your thoughts?
Thinking about summers just makes me smile because it's such a great opportunity that you don't get to have when you get old, of like doing something that you really love and have fun with and give you an opportunity to do stuff outside of school. So I always tell people, try to get your schooling stuff done during the school year so that you can have those 3 months of summer to do whatever else that you want to increase your application. For some people, that means they'll find a summer research program and they kind of just smash all of the like research, like a big old project into those 3 months, and they learn a ton about that. I had one client who I think went to Australia and did like a 2-month research project with marine something over there. And so it was just something different and something fun. And he learned a lot about the scientific process doing that. Other people will do, I went to Kazakhstan for 2 months and I taught English there. A lot of people will do traveling kind of things. Make sure those traveling things are productive, that you're doing something where you can show that you are really getting involved in that community and really helping people out there and learning about culture and learning about working with people who are different than you and things like that. Besides that, I think any kind of extracurricular activity, like if you are doing martial arts, so that it could be a time where you have like set up a camp where you do, you know, something more intensive with some of the students, or people go away and counsel at camps and things like that. So the kind of the sky's the limit of what you can do with your summer. I would make sure you do something that you are genuinely passionate about and that you love, and something that can show or that can develop your character. So basically working with people, learning to do things with people and with teams that you might not normally do during the school year, and have fun with it. I think that it's a really great opportunity to explore.
Absolutely, I agree. And I've been kind of watching the chat as you've been talking, and every single thing that people have mentioned is good, in my opinion. I saw healthcare related jobs, internships, virtual research opportunities. I think literally all of those are great opportunities for summer, as long as it's something that helps you and teaches you about either science or medicine or something that you can connect back or is potentially good for the community. Volunteering, if there's some sort of way you can connect it and you're passionate about it, I would say go for it. All right, and we're going to wrap up our webinar with our final question here. It's a really, really good one. I'll start with Dr. Lee. So what are some values that you would recommend that all people interested in medicine should have?
Yeah, so I think that everyone should definitely be very passionate about medicine. And one, because you're going to be in school for the next 15 years or more. And obviously, I think that you should have a very high set of ethics and integrity because you are treating other people. And not every patient encounter is a life or death encounter, but every encounter does have an impact on someone's life and on their health. So those are probably what I think are some of the most important values.
Wonderful. And Dr. Chu?
I completely agree with that. And I would also say emotional intelligence is really important. Understanding how to connect with people and read people and respond to people in a way that's professional, compassionate, empathetic is a super duper important quality to be a great physician.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for answering all of our questions today. It's been extremely helpful. Some people have been asking if you can access the webinar. We are going to email everyone the webinar recording after this, so you will have access to it after the webinar.
Hello. Very much.
Hello, there's one more question. Actually, I don't have access to chat. Is it okay to ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So it is regarding BS MD program. There are some programs that are having like 3+4 years, like total 7 years. And so in that also, like for bachelor's, they have to maintain certain GPA. So what happens if somebody cannot having maintaining GPA after 3 years, they cannot have bachelor's degree. So how will that years go waste, or they can still get the bachelor's degree?
So if you don't maintain the GPA, that just means that you're going to lose that guaranteed seat in medical school. You'll still have an opportunity to get that bachelor's degree if you finish your degree requirements. And typically with the requirements, especially if it's a 3-year program, you can always take that extra 4th year and just be like a regular traditional applicant. The GPA requirement is really just there for maintaining your acceptance to medical school, not for whether or not you get that bachelor's degree, but you may have to take that 4th year in order to get the bachelor's.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, we will wrap up for today. Thank you so much to Dr. Lee, Dr. Chu, and Selena, as well as MedSchoolCoach for helping us organize this webinar. We will be linking
Are you
MedSchool.
serious right now?
Oh, sorry, please just be sure to keep yourself on mute while we are discussing, but if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them at a later time. But we will be linking MedSchoolCoach's social media and any platforms. So if you want to check them out, be sure to check them out there. And with that, we will end for today. You'll be able to view the recording on MedSchoolCoach's email that they send out, as well as our YouTube channel, MedSTEMPowered. And we will see you all later. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.